This is Cammie Mansfield, Interpretive Resources Project Coordinator for Gwinnett County Department of Community Services, and I'm here with Diane Kandler. Today is Friday, October 20th, 2023, and we are at the Gwinnett Environmental and Heritage Center located in Buford, Georgia. Ms. Kandler, can you start by spelling your full name for the recording?
Yes. Diane, D-I-A-N-E. Howerton is my maiden name, H-O-W-E-R-T-O-N. Kandler is my last name, K-A-N-D-L-E-R.
And also for the recording, can you state your birthday and where you were born?
Yes. Augusta, Georgia is where I was born, October 26, 1951.
And I know that your family are lifelong residents or generations of residents of the Gwinnett County area. Can you tell us about your family's history?
Okay. My great-grandparents, the Shelleys, her name was Lizzie, his name was William, married in Virginia and moved here to run the mines. And that was in 1883. And they bought the house that sits on Level Creek Road now, and it was already an existing dwelling, but they bought it. It was a wedding gift. Actually, the bride's mother bought the land. It was 125 acres right there on Level Creek Road at the time, which included part of the mine. And so they bought it in 1883, and that's where their family settled. And then they lived there, and their daughter lived there, and my mother lived there, and that's where my mother was living when she died. Yeah.
So that is over 100 years that your family lived.
Family owned it for 132 years, before my mom died.
And I know you never lived in the house.
No.
But when you were younger, you would visit your grandmother?
Right.
What do you remember about the house when you were younger?
When my grandmother was alive, Sugar Hill was this sleepy, sleepy little town. You wouldn't, compared to what it is now, but there was a swing on the front porch, and that swing is still there on the front porch, and we would sit out on that swing, and it was like we would count the cars as they drove by, and if we hit 10 in a day, we were doing well, and now you would have 10 in a minute going by, but we would do that. And the old barn was back in the back that my grandfather had built, and we would get up in the loft and jump down, and it was, by the time we were visiting, it wasn't a farm anymore, but it was just a creaky old barn, probably very dangerous, but we did it anyway. And there was a well house where my grandmother drew water, and that was still there. And she did have running water, but the well was still there. And she didn't have a bathroom when we were children, and at one point she sold, I think it was 10 acres of land in Gwinnett County, enough to build a bathroom. That land would be worth a fortune today, but back then it bought a bathroom, and she added that on. But, yeah.
So that was added, like an extra room?
It was a porch, and she turned the porch into a bathroom. It's a tiny little bathroom, but yeah.
That's such an interesting transition. Can you describe, what it looked like?
With the bathroom?
Yes.
It was tiny. It had been a porch, so it had a slanted roof. I'm sorry, I talk with my hands, but okay. It had a slanted roof, of course the toilet and the tub, and a little bitty sink, and you could barely turn around in there, but it was wonderful because up until that time, and I guess I was about 12 when the bathroom was put in, but up until then, there was an outhouse in the back. And we lived in Augusta. We were city people. And so when we came to visit, it was like, we got to go to that outhouse. And it was creepy and scary. And, so we were so glad when that bathroom went in. And
do you know when she got indoor plumbing to the house, did the water come from the well or did it come from?
There was water she had running water in the house. In the kitchen, there was running water in the sink, but she just didn't have a bathroom built in until, I guess that was probably late 60s, maybe.
And so your great-grandparents are the ones who originally purchased the property. And like you said, they moved from Virginia to work in the
Yes.
gold mines here, and they purchased the property. Were they also farmers then as well?
They were farmers, but I don't have a lot of information on how much they farmed. I think they just farmed enough to grow their crops and, to get by on that. But my grandfather became the judge of Sugar Hill at the time, and he held that position for quite a while, an elected position. So I guess, and they had 6 children. Trying to remember 6, yeah. 5 children. They had 5 kids, my grandmother being one of them, yeah.
And did they all end up living in the area, or?
Yes, almost all of them, even when they grew up, lived near there. When we would go to Grandma's house on Sundays, everybody would come, and they would sit outside in their chairs and gossip and bicker a lot. And she had a sister that lived right next door, and there was a little path in between them. So when we came, because there weren't enough bedrooms for all of us, I always stayed with my Aunt Kate down right next door, and that was her sister. Yeah.
What was her house like? Was it old as well, or?
It was old. When my grandmother got married to my grandfather, they lived in a different house. They moved out of the house and lived in a different house. And then my grandfather died suddenly. I think he was in his late 30s. And so the family that lived in the house on Level Creek Road moved over one more house. And so my grandmother then moved back into that house. And so her family grew up there. And my grandfather, my great-grandfather and great-grandmother lived in the house where my Aunt Kate stayed. So anyway, that house is torn down. There's a subdivision there now. So.
And that property that your great-grandparents purchased, you said there were some mines on the property as well. What were the names of those mines? Or did they have names?
We just called them the mines. We as children, we knew very little about that. We knew there were mines there. I think one was the Simmons mine, and but I don't know. Unfortunately, I don't know a lot about the mines. We were forbidden to go near them because they were by then dangerous to go into, and so we were not allowed to be near them. They were across the road from the house, so I don't know a lot about them.
That's okay.
Sorry.
Did your mother have any memories that she shared with you about the mines?
Just that they would go in, not her, but they would work there. They would come home when she was a little girl. They worked the mines, and I don't even know what time they closed the mines. They weren't profitable, so they had to shut them down, and that's when my grandfather became the judge instead, I guess, to do that, to earn a living. So.
And your grandparents also farmed the property as well. Do you remember what sort of things they grew on the property?
Well, my grandfather died, and my grandmother was pregnant with their last child when he died. So at that point, when that child was born, she had 5 children. And she, up until then, they had cows. They just grew vegetables just for them, enough crops just for them. But my grandmother had to take on work to support the children. This was way before there was Social Security to take care of people then. And her family actually told her name was Gay, my grandmother was Gay, to divide the children up because there was no way she could take care of them and just send them out to different relatives to live, and she would not do it. She wouldn't separate the family. So she took on ironing and washing for people. And in my mother's book, she tells about how people would hire her to do washing and ironing. And, that was in the days when you did the wringer wash machine and that type thing, and the ironing. And she tells a story in there about how one woman had hired her to wash the clothes, and then she came by to pick them up. And so then she tried to talk my grandmother down on how much she was going to pay her. I think she was supposed to pay her like $2 or $3, And she said, well, I'm only going to pay you $1. And my grandmother stood her ground, and she said, if you don't pay me what you owe me, you're not going to get your clothes back. So, I was proud of her for that. I'd not heard that story till I read it in my mom's book. And then my grandmother later went to the Sugar Hill Elementary School I don't know what it was called at the time, but it stood at the end of Level Creek Road. And she worked as in the kitchen there, serving the lunches. So she did that, and she took in ironing and stuff to keep the family going. And of course, my grandfather and my great-grandfather and great-grandmother lived down the road, and I'm sure they helped her all they could. So anyway, yeah, tough lady.
Yes. Well, tell us, because I know your mom was
Tough lady.
Quite a remarkable woman as well. Tell us about her.
Well, she was born in the house, and she was born in 1916, and she enjoyed school very much. She had a sister that died from scarlet fever when she was 15, and she wrote a poem, and that's in that book that she wrote, the poem is, and that was when her love of words came into being. My mother loved to write. And at 17, she had to drop out of school. That's when the Depression hit. So she dropped out of school to start working at the Bona Allen. Is it still there? I don't even know. Okay. But anyway, she went to school at the Bona Allen plant, and I went to work there to earn money for the family. And so everybody went off to work and did what they could to earn money during the Depression. And then she married very young. She married a local boy at 18. It wasn't my dad. And they moved up to Detroit, Michigan, and worked up there, sent money home. And that marriage did not work out. And that was not the time when, divorces were highly frowned on. So she was kind of afraid to come home and face the family and everything. But her, she was a single woman up in Detroit, Michigan at the time, so she came back. And of course, in 1941, when Pearl Harbor was bombed, a few months later, she joined the WACs. And she was in that first group of ladies that joined the WACs, and she was stationed in Daytona first. And her job was to go around at night because they had this fear of boats, German boats coming into the coast. And her job was to go by and make sure in the evening that everybody had their blackout curtains done, so that in case there was an attack, that they were downed out. And then she was transferred up to New Jersey, where she met my daddy, who was also in the Army. So met him at the USO. So that's the story of them. Then they moved to San Antonio, and from San Antonio, after the war, they moved to Augusta. Yeah.
Where did they end up getting married?
They got married in San Antonio, yeah. And my daddy was transferred down there, and my mom, of course, the war was over by then, and my mom went down with him, and they got married down there, so, yeah.
Did they talk about that time period of their life a lot with their children, with you and your siblings?
Well, when we were not born when they lived in San Antonio. When they moved back to Augusta is when we were born, and my mother had children very close together. She had one, she was 35 years old, when she was 36 years old, when she was 37 years old. So we're all just a year apart. And my daddy went off to Korea. So my mom, at that time, she didn't even drive the car. So she was left for, I think, 18 months to 2 years without a vehicle. We would catch the bus at the end of the driveway to get where we needed to go. And then my daddy came back when I was in the first grade. Yeah.
And so I know that your mother did a lot of things throughout her life. You mentioned her writing. Did she continue to write at that time? Or?
When we were growing up, Mom did a lot of do-it-yourself things and crafty hobby things. She loved doing that. She painted. And then she went back to school because, remember I told you she had to drop out of high school. So she got her GED, and I think she was probably her early 60s when she did that. And then she went to college. And she went to college the same time my two brothers went to college, and they were at the same college at the same time, which is a pretty neat story. So then my grandmother got sick, and my mom had to go take care of her, so she couldn't finish her last semester of college. She always meant to go back and finish it. She majored in art, but in the meantime, my grandmother died, and they moved into the house that my mom was, where she grew up, and so they were back here then and that's where she lived the rest of her life then. But she did go to school with both of her sons. It was at Augusta College.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. And she studied art, you said?
She studied art. Mm-hmm.
Wow. But you said she painted before she went to...
She what I call piddle painting. She just hobby painted then. Now, when when my daddy died, and he died after they had moved back here to Sugar Hill, she took up painting again and took it on with the force. She spent a good bit of her time and made some beautiful stuff. She really did. And while she was in college, she took up pottery. She did that. And when computers came around, I guess she was in her 80s by then. She took computer courses so that she could learn how to use the computer. She got on Facebook when she was 90. She didn't quite understand it all at the beginning, and she would say things not really, and she thought she was just writing to us, and she's speaking to anybody out there that can see it, which got her into trouble sometimes. And so, but anyway, she did that, and that's how she wrote her books, on the computer, and scanned the pictures that went in it, that kind of thing. She took art classes again, became involved in the senior center here and painted there. And Mom and Dad camped a lot. They belonged to a camping organization, and it was a big, big part of our life. And so we would go lots of weekends to camp outs in Georgia, and then once a year we'd go to a national camp out, and that would be anywhere in the States. We had lots of friends we camped with. They worked their ranks up till Daddy became the national director of that organization. And anyway, that was a big part of their life, was camping. We started off in a tent till we got to the full-blown big RVs that we would pull. And so it was fun. That was a fun part of our life.
What year was it that your mother moved back into the White House?
1979.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what year did she pass away?
2015. Yeah. May the 10th, 2015. Yeah. And she was 99 at the time. Yeah. And lived independently because she would not live with anybody. She wasn't going to come to us or my brothers or anything like that. And so at that point, we were calling to make sure everything was okay. But she was in good health until the last 6 weeks of her life, really. Yeah. She had bladder cancer, but it didn't slow her down. And she rarely went to the doctor, and then she started having problems bladder-wise, and that's when they discovered the cancer. But she had that for about a year, and then it reoccurred. But she she lived by alone until 6 weeks before she died. Yeah, and went in the hospital and then into the nursing home for rehab, and then she died there, So anyway, she lived a long and very fruitful life. She was a very no-nonsense woman. Boy, we were not allowed to cry when we were growing up unless we were bleeding. I mean, it was like, we don't cry over silly things. And that was the generation that you were tough. So anyway, I cry at the drop of a hat. My husband will tell you I could cry over a coffee commercial on TV, but it was not my mom. I think I saw her cry twice in my life, and that was once when her mother died and once when my daddy died, and that's it. I don't remember any other time. So
she sounds like a very strong.
She was a tough lady. Yeah,
amazing woman.
Yeah.
Was her mother similar to her in that way?
Yeah. They just had to be to survive. It just really was.
Well, and she lived in that house, like you said, on her own for so many years.
Right.
Did she take care of the house herself?
She took care of the house. One day, I think my mom was in her 80s. I called one day to see what she was doing. And now that I'm 70-something, I realize being in your 80s is not as old as I thought it was then. But anyway, she was the house had really high ceilings, and this is when stenciling and borders were all the rage. So I guess we're talking about, the early 90s, late 80s, I don't know. But anyway, she was up on a ladder, and she was stenciling the top. My daddy had already died, so she was up on the ladder stenciling that very tall ceiling. And I said, "Mom, what are you doing up there?" And she said, "If you don't want to know what I'm doing, then don't ask me what I'm doing." So, and I guess she was in her 90s one time. Somebody came and painted something in the kitchen, and she didn't like the way they did it. So she got a ladder, and she stood on the kitchen counter this time to repaint something in the cabinets up there that wasn't done the way she wanted it done. And of course, she fell, and it broke her hip, but she just kept right on going. You know, she called me, and I lived 2 hours away. My brother lived up in Dahlonega at the time. But anyway, it took her, and she had broken her hip. There was a little fracture there, but it's like it never seemed to slow her down except for just a few days. So, you know.
And did she make any alterations to the house during her time there?
When my mom and dad went back in 1979, they changed the kitchen. It was a tiny little kitchen, and they added a den to the back of the house. And they turned what was the attic into a bedroom up there. That's a whole nother story. The attic had, when we were children, I'm going backwards now, but when we were children, we would go up into that attic, and it just was a wealth of fun stuff to hide in. But there was a sword, a Confederate sword, and I don't know how we knew it was Confederate, I guess because it was in the South, but it was a sword that belonged to one of my great uncles, apparently. And we were always just fascinated by that, and of course our parents didn't know it, but we'd get that sword out and we'd, you know, slice it through the air and stuff like that, but we never hurt each other. And so when I had heard that Mom and Dad were going up there to redo the attic and turn it into a bedroom, I thought, I wonder where the sword is. But somebody came and got the sword already, so whoever was, I guess, next in line, whoever owned it, has that sword, so it's out there somewhere. But it was just full of fabulous old stuff, so it really was.
Anything else you can remember that was up in that attic?
I can't, there was this trunk that was in the attic, and it had been painted, several layers. It had stuff inside, and at some point it was in the house, down in the house, but normally it just sat up in that attic. And when Mom and Dad turned the attic into a bedroom, they just kept that old trunk there, and I think Mom painted it white. And when we had the estate sale, we just left that old beat-up trunk with the people that bought it, the Neils that bought the house. And then after Mom died, I was at home one day, and I was reading through the list of things in the house. She had made a list of the things that were important to her and had sentimental value. And so I found out that trunk actually was given to my grandmother by my grandfather when they got married. And I didn't know it. And I'd left it with the house. And I thought, this won't do. So I called, and I said, can I possibly buy that trunk back from you? And I said, you know, it doesn't look like much, but it's got sentimental value. So he gave it back to me. So I refinished it the best I could, and so now it's in my house. But, you know, just to think that I could have just let that go, you know, the value of that. And then in that same little thing, I was reading the paper that Mom had left with us of things that were important to her. There was a table that my grandfather had built for my grandmother, because my grandmother was very short. And so he built her a table at the height for her, and it was their kitchen table. And it was out in the workshop when Mom and Dad died. And so I read that. So I called Brian again and said, any way I could buy that table from you? So he sold me that table, and I use it up. I do my art on that table now. So anyway, I have that table, and that was built from wood from the land, and I have that trunk. So anyway, neat. It's a little round top trunk.
It's all around us.
Yeah,
That's incredible.
It is.
So you mentioned you're a painter as well.
Well, I dabble in watercolor. Yeah.
Did you learn from your mother, or did?
I guess I got my love from it from my mother, for sure. No, I took watercolor classes to learn to do it. But anyway, so I do that, and my daughter is a very good artist. So there's like 3 generations of us. So yeah.
What sort of things would your mother paint?
She painted landscapes, almost all landscapes. When my daddy was in the service, we were stationed in Germany when I was too young to remember, but they went to this place that had this beautiful church. And she took a picture of it, and she painted that. And I remember it hanging in the house when I was growing up. But later, she repainted that because she didn't like the original, so she painted another one, and it's in oil. So my brother Bruce has one, and my brother Eddie, who died last year, has the other one, but my sister-in-law kept it. So those two paintings are still around. And I guess now, 70 years old, I guess. I don't know. That's when, yeah, bound to be about 70 years old, because I was just a baby when we went to Germany. So, yeah.
And did she work in watercolors or oils or?
She did. I have some of her watercolors. She did a great job doing watercolors. And in fact, my favorite things she did was watercolor. And oil is mainly what she did. She would record Bob Ross every Saturday morning and get up and watch the recording, and she'd have her oil out and she'd paint a Bob Ross picture. So a lot of the stuff looks very Bob Rossish, so that. And then she took art classes and started developing her own style. But yeah.
And you said she did mostly landscapes.
Yes.
Were they local landscapes, or did she?
No, probably things she would see in a book or a picture she would have. She would paint that. I don't remember anything local. She did paint the barn, and I think my brother has that one. She painted that. That's the only local thing I have. She never painted the house. A local artist here, Chris Walker, painted a portrait of my mom's house after she died, and we have it hanging in our, it was a wonderful job, and we have it hanging in our house, and the people that own our house have an original of it too, so yeah. Neat.
And just to get all the generations, you work in watercolors, and do you do landscapes, or do you, what's your subject matter
Most
choice?
of mine are landscapes too, yeah. Sometimes something whimsical, and sometimes just landscapes, so yeah.
And your daughter, what type of art?
She does mostly landscape. She does a lot of mountains because that's what she loves, and her technique and mine are completely different. I do more details, and hers is very flowy, but I don't know how to do flowy and make it look right, so she does that, yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
It's so nice to hear how these different things have just kind of been passed down through the generations.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Trying to think of anything else to tell you about. They had a cow named Daisy. We have a picture of her. I know that my mother snuck out one time to go on a date, and I guess when she was about 15, she wasn't supposed to be dating yet. And she snuck out, went on a date, and the guy picked her up in a buggy. And they went to some kind of fair or something that was going on. And when she came back, my grandmother met her at the door. And I think she was in really bad trouble. Back then, you just whipped your kids, no matter how old they were. So I'm sure that's what happened. So, yeah.
And you said your mother worked for Bona Allen Tannery. Do you know what she did there?
I don't. I just, yeah. That was a shoe place, wasn't it? Isn't that what it did? Leather and...
Leather, shoes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what she did. And I'm not sure what she did when she lived in Detroit for that while. I don't know. She didn't talk about that part of her life. We never knew she'd even been divorced until we were probably teenagers. We didn't know that. I know a funny thing about my mom is that my mom always told us that she'd been born in 1918. It's in the family Bible. It's in everything that she ever had to fill out. And when my grandmother died, we found this obituary. We were looking through things, and it was talking about that my mom's dad died in 1919, and that we knew that my mom was 3 years old when my mom's dad died. So we went to my mom and we said, "We thought you were born in 1918. And she just kind of, we were adults by then. And so she just kind of laughed it off. And I said, "Can you tell us why?" And she said, "That's my business." But anyway, she was actually born in 1916. And so at that point, she just owned up to how old she was. So we never knew why she lied to make herself 2 years younger than she was. because she never told us. She was a very private woman. She never told us why. And the only thing we can figure out is that my daddy was younger than my mother by 5 years, and I wonder if she lied about her age. So he would think she was just 3 years older instead of 5 years older. That's the only thing we came up with. So anyway.
It's a great story. Well, is there anything else, any other memories or accomplishments that, your family you can think of related to this area?
To this area. This is not a mother memory, it's a memory of my brother and I. When we would come and visit Grandma, she would always send us down the road. And I think that house is still there down the road, but I think it's covered up by weeds and it's all grown over. I don't even know, you can just see a glimpse of it. Someone named Mrs. White lived there, and we would go down because Mrs. White had chickens and they would swap. So we would go down there, but it was kind of like a scary walk because you had to walk through this path in the woods to get down there. And I don't even know what we took to swap, but whatever it was, my grandmother and Mrs. White would swap whatever it was Grandma had, and eggs, and so we would go down there and get the eggs. And one time my brother dropped the eggs and broke them all, and then he lied about what he did, and so and said that Mrs. White wasn't home. And later Grandma found out that all those eggs had been broken, and she was not happy about that. But anyway, we didn't want to get in trouble, so he lied. So that's what kids did. Yeah,
exactly.
So. But I can tell you a story about my brother with the wash machine. My grandmother had a wringer washer, and it was out by the pump house. And he was trying to help one time, and if you've ever seen one, you may not have, but anyway, you put the wet clothes through this wringer and it would squeeze all the water out of it. And so he was trying to help, so he put his hand through that wringer, and it was electric, so it was plugged in. So it took his hand, and of course it finally stopped, but he got his hand stuck in that wringer, and they had to undo it to get his hand out, and he just cried and cried and cried. I don't know how old he was, but probably old enough to know better, but did it anyway. So yeah. So anyway.
And so did she always do the laundry that way? Do you remember?
My grandmother?
Yeah. Or did she?
There was never a wash machine in the house, not when my grandmother lived there, so I'm guessing so. That wringer stayed out in the pump house, and they would bring it out and plug it in and turn it on. Yeah. So, and that was, she died in 70-something, 77, I think. So I don't ever remember there being a wash machine in the house. Yeah.
Incredible.
It is.
Well, is there anything else that you can think of?
Mom was just Mom to us. But, when we got the book, I found out a lot about Mom that I didn't know. And I knew she'd been in the wax. I knew she had was in that, but I didn't realize she'd been in Detone. I didn't know that she had any part in the war effort. And the more I learned about her, the more I read about her, I just became so very proud of her. Like, she was at that point a single woman that, in a time when that wasn't the easiest thing to be, and she just bravely left her home and went off into the wax, and she didn't know what else to do with herself. She said, she had to find a way to make money, and she just did a lot of things. She didn't let anything slow her down. She would move a wall, she'd move a cabinet, she'd paint anything that needed painting. She was not afraid to try. She always had a project going, and this will be the last thing that I remember to tell. When Mom was in the hospital, and the doctor, she had some kidney failure, and the doctor was telling her that she probably had about 2 weeks to live. And she said, well, I need more than 2 weeks because I have a project to finish. And at that point, she was writing a story, a letter to each of us, all the children and all the grandchildren, and she wasn't finished. And so he said, well, we can do this operation. And she was at 99, and she says, well, I want it because I'm not finished yet. So she always, always had a project going. And I think that's what kept her going, because She did.
Thank you so much for
You're
sharing
welcome.
all
You're
of your
welcome.
memories
Yeah.
and your family stories about Sugar Hill and your memories of your grandmother and your mother. And we really appreciate you taking the
Thank
time.
you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.